Salvador Dali. Imagine a person. The day he was born, he was not given a new identity, because his family believed he was the reincarnation of his older brother who had died before him. He was taken to a cemetery every week. He was asked to look at photographs of his deceased brother every day. And he was constantly told the same thing. You are not Salvador. You are his return. So what happens when a child grows up under such circumstances? Does he become a painter, a genius, or one of the greatest showmen the world has ever seen? Today, we are going to tell the story of one of the most controversial figures in art history, the man behind the melting clocks, the star of Surrealism, and perhaps a man who became lost within the character he created for himself. This is the story of Salvador Dali. To understand Dali, we must first understand the world he entered. In 1914, World War I began. The most advanced nations in the world, they sent millions of people to the battlefields. Artists were horrified. For years, society had been built upon ideals of progress, reason, science, and civilization. Suddenly, those ideals collapsed. From this disappointment emerged the first major artistic movement, Dadaism. The Dadaists rejected everything: art, logic, rules, even meaning itself. But after a while, some artists began asking a question. All right, we reject everything, but what comes next? That is where Surrealism entered the stage. In 1924, writer and thinker André Breton published the Surrealist Manifesto. The goal was clear: to explore the depths of the human mind, to uncover dreams, to place the subconscious at the center of art. And at this point, they had one major source of inspiration: Sigmund Freud. Freud's theories of the unconscious became almost a sacred text for the Surrealists. And a few years later, a young man appeared who would become the movement's most famous face, Salvador Dalí. Born in 1904 in Figueres, Spain, Salvador Dali's life was unusual from the very beginning. 9 months before his birth, his parents had lost their first child. His name was also Salvador. The newborn child was given the same name, but the issue went far beyond a name. For years, his family told him that he was the reincarnation of his deceased brother. This deeply affected Dalí's sense of identity. Many historians believe it played a major role in why he saw himself as different, exceptional, and extraordinary throughout his life. His behavior during childhood was equally unusual. Some biographical sources describe him as displaying aggressive behavior and engaging in actions that disturbed those around him. How much of these stories are true, and how much have been exaggerated over time, remains a matter of debate. However, one thing is certain. From an early age, Dalí loved attracting attention, and he was remarkably good at it. The first major turning point in Dalí's life was the death of his mother. She had been his greatest supporter. Years later, Dalí wrote these words about her. I lost the only person who knew how to make the flaws of my soul invisible. Her death devastated him. When his father later married his aunt, their relationship deteriorated even further. Dalí left home, and he moved to Madrid to begin his artistic education. At the Art Academy in Madrid, Dalí quickly became known for his unconventional personality. He disliked rules. He challenged authority, and he constantly sought to be the center of attention. During this period, he met some of the most important people of his life. One was the renowned filmmaker, Luis Buñuel. Another was the celebrated poet, Federico Garcia Lorca. These three young men would go on to shape the future of Spanish art and culture. Dalí's friendship with Lorca, in particular, became the subject of discussion for many years. The exact nature of their relationship remains debated even today. What is certain, however, is that Lorca greatly admired Dalí and held his artistic talent in high regard. In the late 1920s, Dalí's path led him to Paris. There, he met some of the greatest figures in the art world. Among them was Pablo Picasso. Picasso's influence was clearly visible in Dalí's early works. However, Dalí soon began to forge his own artistic path. In Paris, he joined the Surrealist circle. He became a member of André Breton's group, and from that point on, his rise truly began. Because Dalí was not only a talented painter, he was also an extraordinary self-promoter. In 1929, a woman entered Dalí's life. Her name was Gala Dali. Gala was much more than his wife. She became his manager, organizer, protector, and the architect of his career. Many historians agree that Gala played a crucial role in transforming Dalí's art into a global brand. A large number of art scholars also agree that Dalí's most productive years began after Gala entered his life. Another towering figure in Dalí's life was Sigmund Freud. Freud's theories of the subconscious fascinated him. Dreams, repressed desires, fears, obsessions. Dalí began incorporating all of these elements into his paintings. In 1938, he finally managed to meet Freud in London. For Dalí, this encounter was nothing short of a dream come true. After all, Freud's ideas formed the very foundation of his artistic philosophy. Dalí was not merely a painter. He was a living advertising campaign. He wore bizarre clothing, made outrageous statements, and constantly sought to shock people. What we now call a personal brand in the age of social media was something Dalí had already mastered nearly a century earlier. His famous upward curled moustache became a signature. People could recognize Dalí without even seeing one of his paintings. During the 1930s, Europe was descending into chaos. The Spanish Civil War began. Many artists openly chose sides, particularly left-wing artists who actively opposed fascism. Dalí, however, made several controversial statements regarding politics. As a result, tensions grew between him and André Breton, the leader of the Surrealist movement. Eventually, Breton and his circle expelled Dalí from the movement. Dalí's response became legendary. "I am Surrealism." This statement perfectly summarized both his immense self-confidence and the arrogance for which he was often criticized. Dalí left Europe and moved to the United States. There, he became a true star. He was no longer just a painter. He had become a popular culture icon. He appeared in newspapers. He appeared on television. He held exhibitions. He staged spectacular public performances. America embraced both his genius and his love of spectacle. In 1945, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the world forever. Dalí changed as well. Deeply fascinated by the power of the atom, he entered a new artistic phase. This period became known as nuclear mysticism. His paintings began to feature atoms, fragmentation, scientific imagery, and religious symbolism. For Dalí, science and religion were no longer opposing forces. They were parts of the same universe. In 1982, Gala died. It was one of the most devastating events of Dalí's life. The woman who had stood beside him for decades was gone. Dalí withdrew from public life. His health deteriorated, and he spent much of his final years in isolation. His museum in his hometown of Figueres became his last refuge. In 1989, Salvador Dalí passed away, but he left behind far more than paintings. He left behind a character, a brand, a legend. Even today, people remain divided about Dalí. Some regard him as one of the greatest geniuses in the history of art. Others see him as an exceptionally talented marketer. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Because Salvador Dali's greatest creation was not merely his paintings. Perhaps his greatest masterpiece was Salvador Dali himself. Now, let's take a closer look at some of Salvador Dali's most significant masterpieces. The Persistence of Memory, 1931. If someone were to compile a list of the 10 most recognizable paintings in art history, this work would undoubtedly be included. A barren landscape, melting clocks, a strange figure resembling a sleeping face, and time itself, slowly consuming everything. Many art historians interpret this painting as a representation of humanity's helplessness in the face of time. Here, time is not rigid or permanent. The clocks are soft, distorted, and fluid. Much like human memory, memories bend and change over time. Reality becomes blurred. What makes the painting even more fascinating, however, is Dali's own explanation. According to him, the idea came from something surprisingly simple. One day, he noticed a piece of camembert cheese melting in the heat. The image stayed with him, and from that simple observation emerged the concept of the melting clocks. Perhaps that is why the painting continues to retain its mystery. Dalí never offered a definitive interpretation. Instead, he wanted viewers to discover their own meanings within the work. The Great Masturbator, 1929. This painting opens one of the darkest doors into Dalí's subconscious. The large face dominating the composition is actually a recurring self-image that appears throughout many of his works. The painting is filled with themes of sexuality, fear, desire, shame, and obsession. Dalí's childhood traumas and his complicated relationship with intimacy can be strongly felt throughout the piece. Even today, it remains one of the most psychologically analyzed works of his career. The painting reveals an artist confronting his deepest anxieties and desires while transforming them into visual symbolism. Metamorphosis of Narcissus, 1937. This masterpiece draws inspiration from the ancient Greek myth of Narcissus. Narcissus was a young man who fell in love with his own reflection. Dalí presents the same figure in two different forms. On one side, we see a crouching human body. On the other, an almost identical shape transforms into a hand holding an egg from which a flower emerges. This visual repetition demonstrates Dalí's famous paranoid critical method, a technique he developed to perceive multiple realities within a single image. The painting encourages viewers to see more than one interpretation simultaneously. Reality shifts before our eyes. And that concept lies at the very heart of Surrealism. The Elephants, 1948. One of Dalí's most striking works is The Elephants. The painting depicts two elephants walking on impossibly long, thin legs. At first glance, the image appears absurd. Yet beneath the surreal appearance lies a powerful idea. Traditionally, elephants symbolize strength, power, and stability. Dalí deliberately undermines those associations. These enormous creatures stand upon legs so fragile, they seem ready to collapse at any moment. The result is a fascinating contradiction. Power and vulnerability exist together. Strength and weakness become inseparable. It is a visual reminder that even the mightiest forces may rest upon fragile foundations. The Temptation of St. Anthony, 1946. This painting marks the beginning of Dalí's growing interest in religious themes. In a vast desert landscape, St. Anthony stands resisting a procession of gigantic creatures approaching him. Horses, elephants, and towering figures supported by impossibly long legs. Each symbolizes earthly temptations, lust, power, wealth, and ambition. The saint struggles against these seductive forces, Dalí's use of symbolism is particularly powerful here. The painting explores the eternal conflict between spiritual devotion and worldly desire. Christ of St. John of the Cross, 1951. Many art historians consider this painting to be Dalí's greatest technical achievement. The image presents Christ from a completely unconventional perspective. Rather than viewing him from below or directly in front, we see him from above. It is as though we are looking down from the heavens themselves. The dramatic viewpoint creates a sense of awe and transcendence. Unlike many traditional depictions of the crucifixion, there is no visible blood or graphic suffering. Instead, the focus is on spirituality, divinity, and cosmic perspective. The painting reflects Dalí's transition away from pure surrealism toward religious and mystical subjects. Today, it is widely regarded as one of the most powerful representations of Christ in modern art. Gala of the Spheres, 1952. Following the advent of the atomic age, Dalí became deeply fascinated by science and atomic theory. In this painting, the face of Gala is fragmented into dozens of floating spheres. The image appears broken apart, yet at the same time, it remains perfectly whole. This paradox fascinated Dalí. He sought to translate the invisible structure of the atomic world into visual form. The painting symbolizes a universe composed of countless particles held together by unseen forces. It is one of the defining masterpieces of his nuclear mysticism period. The Sacrament of the Last Supper, 1955. This work represents one of the high points of Dalí's religious period. Inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's famous depiction of the Last Supper, Dalí reimagines the scene in his own unique style. The composition is surrounded by geometric forms, radiant light, and mystical symbolism. The apostles and Christ appear within a transparent architectural structure that feels both earthly and otherworldly. By this stage of his career, Dalí was no longer focused solely on dreams and the subconscious. He had become increasingly interested in spirituality, faith, mathematics, and the mysteries of the universe. The painting reflects that transformation beautifully. When we examine Dalí's works, one thing becomes clear. Nothing is ever just what it seems. A clock is never simply a clock. An elephant is never merely an elephant. A face is never only a face. In Dalí's world, every image opens the door to another meaning. Perhaps that is what makes him such a remarkable artist. No two people see exactly the same thing in his paintings, yet everyone sees something. And even decades after his death, Salvador Dalí continues to create new dreams inside the minds of those who encounter his work. That may be the true measure of his legacy.